Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, August the 29th, 2024. Last year, we did what I thought at least was a memorable show with the director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation on why we should never forget the evil that occurred in these places. On their website, they have a quote from Henry Apple. That says, there is only one thing worse than Auschwitz itself, and that is if the world forgets there was such a place. So the foundation is in the business of remembering rather than forgetting. I'm not sure if my guest today would agree with that. Tanya Gold has a very provocative piece in this month's issue of Harper's Magazine, My Auschwitz Vacation on Holocaust Tourism. Tanya is joining us from Penzance in Cornwall, I think about as far, not necessarily geographically, but symbolically from Auschwitz as one could get. Tanya, what do you think of that quote about there is only one thing worse than Auschwitz itself, and that is if the world forgets there was such a place?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I've only just seen it for the first time, but I mean, I look at something like that and I think, well, what a wonderful sentiment to have, and wouldn't it be wonderful if people actually believed that? But I don't feel I live in a substantially less racist world than we did in 1939. And I think we're still processing these things. But if we're talking about Poland, and my piece was about Poland, there was a huge amount of anti-Semitism in Poland before 1939, all the way from the medieval period, from Polish people. And then the Nazis came in, and they had their own kind of murderous racism towards Jewish people. So I think I look at something like that because I did go to many places in Poland that were supposed to memorialize and commemorate the Jewish civilization of Eastern Europe, which is, it's simply gone. You don't go to Poland and find large remnants or fragments of that enormous Jewish community that existed until 1941 and was annihilated between 1941 and 1945. I mean, it just simply isn't there anymore. So, I mean, so that's all gone. And then you get a line like that on a screen, and I just think, it just doesn't, I'm sorry to say, it just doesn't really mean anything to me, because that's not the reality that I found in Poland. I did not find the reality of grief. I didn't even find a real acceptance of what had happened, of the truth of what had happened. And I'll talk to you about this because there are some Polish historians doing absolutely fascinating work on how Poland has processed the Shoah, which took place, as you know, all in Poland, not by Polish hands. You do not call them Polish concentration camps. They were concentration camps in Nazi-occupied Poland. But the experience of the Poles towards their Jewish neighbours during the war is much more complicated, and I would say darker than certainly the Polish government and most Polish people will admit. So that's a rather rambly way of saying it just doesn't mean anything to me. It's a word. It's a sentence. It's a sentence on a wall.
One correction. I'm not sure if you meant it, Tanya, but the Holocaust didn't entirely take place in Poland. It took place in much of the rest of Eastern Europe. Is that what you meant? I mean,
well, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, of which 5 million of them were killed in the extermination camps in Poland. They were moved. The Jews of, the Jews of Italy, of Austria, of Germany, of of all the countries where the Nazis could get them, were at the beginning, they just used to shoot them in the forests, in the woods, kill them any way they could. But then the Nazis realized it was rather upsetting for German soldiers and their collaborators to kill the Jews in that way. So they started experimenting with ways to kill them en masse. So it was less upsetting for the German soldiers and their collaborators. So of the 6 million murdered Jews of Europe, 5 million of them were killed in death camps that were established by Germans in Poland, and of that 5 million, 3 million of them were Polish Jews.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into a show about the metrics of the Holocaust, but my understanding is that isn't the case. Where's that information from?
Well, I just that 6 million Jews were killed.
No, the 6 million obviously is given.
Yeah.
The 5 million in Poland and 5 million in death camps. My understanding is that there was at least 2 or 3 million were actually killed outside death camps by shooting squads and other kinds of pogroms. But anyway, let's move on that. I mean, this is not a show on the Holocaust.
I'm just going to check that since you're pulling me up on that. I mean, I just was leafing through before I did this. I was leafing through Jan Grabowski's most recent book, so that's where I got that figure. But do let me check it. Since
you can check in real
really
time. But let's Tanya, let's talk about the piece itself, because it's not really. Yeah. It's not really about the Holocaust. It's about your experience visiting Auschwitz, my Auschwitz vacation on Holocaust tourism. I remember when I went to Krakow to visit Auschwitz, and the bus showed up, and the driver said to me, "This is the bus going to Auschwitz." And I thought, maybe I'll write something. You've beaten me to it. Reading your piece, which was very powerful, has Auschwitz essentially become an extension of Disneyland?
No, I certainly wouldn't call it Disneyland, because people don't consciously go there for pleasure. I think people go there for a lot of different reasons. No, I wouldn't call it Disneyland, and I don't think I did call it Disneyland.
No, you didn't, and that was my term.
Well, Disneyland is a place where people just go for pleasure, isn't it?
Although one of the people you spoke to suggested that people also go for a kind of pleasure. I think you met a failed English comedian who said people love other people's misery. Why did they kill all the Jews? Why did they kill all the other Jews? So there's a certain pleasure in seeing other people's misery.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was fascinating. I met him in Krakow, and I stayed in Krakow for several days, and I was fascinated by him. I mean, I don't know if he was a failed comedian. I thought he was a failed comedian. He seemed like a failed comedian.
He had the manner of a failed comedian.
He had the manner of a failed comedian. And I mean, he just seemed extraordinary, because I mean, I didn't go looking for this man. It's like these crazy people find me. And I asked him if I could interview him. And so I had the extraordinary experience of driving around the Jewish quarter of Krakow, again, emptied of Jews, with this man who really didn't like Jews very much, and came out with all these, really incredibly anti-Semitic statements about Jewish power. He said that the Jews weren't very popular with their neighbors in Poland, which of course is true. So he's right about that. So I found it all sort of rather shocking and also quite funny. But he did say one thing to me that seemed very true. I said, "Why do you think people go to Auschwitz?" And he said, "I think they enjoy it." And that did seem to me very true. There's a lot of culture now that people read about this. I mean, every month there seems to be a new sort of hit trash pulpy novel about somebody who died in the Holocaust, or was based on someone who died in the Holocaust. And it seems to me not only sort of like morally obscene, but rather sort of an extension of the crime fiction genre. It's like people want to imagine that happened to them.
Yeah, and we've had a number of those authors on the show, and I sometimes have to bite my lip, because I think you're absolutely right. So let's go back to the piece, My Auschwitz Vacation on Holocaust Tourism. Tell me the background of this. Why did you choose to go?
Well, I chose to go because I am a British Jew, and the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore once said to me, and I think this is very true, Jews reflect their place and time. So I went to an English public school, and I grew up as a British Jew, never quite sure whether I was British or whether I was Jewish or whether I was giving a bad impersonation of both. And I understand you're a British Jew, so maybe you'd have something interesting to say about this.
Yeah, probably stuck in the same place as you. That's why I live in America.
Is it? Yeah, God, I'd love to live in America. And my mother is a historian of the Holocaust, and So in a way, I grew up, and the Jewish world that was most vivid and alive to me, and I know this sounds disgusting, and well, maybe not disgusting, but this sounds very sad and very odd. And I did write an article once where I called the Anglo-Jewish community, which is, as you know, the only intact Jewish community in Europe, peculiarly haunted. So I was just sort of wandering around, not really knowing who I was. And I knew at some point I would have to go to Poland. My grandmother, Minnie, Masha, all her sisters were born in Łódź, which is not that far from Auschwitz. But of course, she didn't talk about it. That generation never did. So I just felt this great curiosity. And then after 2016, I mean, I'd never seen anti-Semitism my whole life. And then after 2016, in Britain, we had a man who I believe was an anti-Semite. I mean, others disagree, that's fine, leading the Labour Party. And we saw what I believe was an explosion of anti-Semitism in public life in Britain. Other people call it anti-Zionism. I know we're not here to talk about this. I think it's anti-Semitism. And I became very, very curious about the relationship between this, what I consider to be growing public anti-Semitism, and this sort of fetish for Holocaust memorials that we're seeing all across Europe. They're everywhere. For your Disney travelers in Britain, they're planning a vast new Holocaust memorial next to Parliament itself, and it just seems absolutely crazy.
Is there something I sometimes thought this, Tanya, something safe about Holocaust memorials? Now, you suggest that in the piece on your critique of what's happening, or suspicion of what's happening in the UK, given that the UK wasn't really directly involved in the Holocaust. Is it just an easy thing to knock off the list?
Well, I think I'm sort of quoting a man I met in Poland called Janusz Makak, who runs the Culture Festival. You do something so you don't have to do more. It's the least you can do. I mean, to me, memorials to any catastrophe, any genocide, if they're part of a more general, I'm reaching for a Catholic term here, penitence or caring, then they mean something. But if they're a substitute for that change and that caring, for example, the Atlantic slave trade. I went to the memorial to the Atlantic slave trade in Bristol, a trading city. There was a tiny little piece of metal on the back of a shed. That's not a memorial. That's an insult. I'm not sure I finished that sentence. I think sometimes you'll build a memorial so you can tell yourself how great you are because you built a memorial. And also there's this whole vogue for using the Shoah as a sort of universal moral teaching point.
Why is that? I mean, there are other Holocausts. There's the Armenian Holocaust, for example. Yeah. I don't know how you compare these, whether it's numbers or the brutality of the thing, but certainly the Turkish,
well, I think it's the desire, isn't it?
Genocide of Armenians is in its own way just as appalling. Why is the German Holocaust of the Jews, the genocide of the Jews, become so central?
Well, I think it's probably, the usual Europe centricness, that we always see. I think that Jews occupy a very unique place in the history of the West. People have always considered us to be they consider us to be a lot of things, and I the person who summarized it best for me was Sartre, and I'll paraphrase. He's the mirror, and the Jew is the mirror, and in the mirror you see everything that you fear and everything that you are, and that is a paraphrase, so please don't Google it. But the Jews have been something of sort of compulsive interest to the world. Of course, we were the Christ killers, we poisoned the wells, we spread the Black Death, and on and on and on. So it doesn't, this interest doesn't surprise me. And also, Jewish people, without wanting to get into too many sort of stereotypes, they do tend to like making culture. Some Jewish people make a lot of culture. So that doesn't surprise me at all, that it has this centrality.
On X, you describe your your trip as a gay romp through Jewish Poland, and you thank Mel Brooks, of course, who made the wonderful film The Producers. What do you mean by a gay romp?
It's a joke, obviously, because in The Producers, of course, which is a play about how you make more money from a flop than you do for a hit. So these two producers, who, by the way, I think are the Jewish soul. You know, one is terrifying, one is terrorized. They express the duality of Mel Brooks and of the sort of the Jew, scare quotes, when attacked. Sort of in the round. So they need to find the worst play in the world. And the play that they find is by a guy called Franz Libkin, and it's called Springtime for Hitler. And Libkin sells it as a springtime for
A
Hitler, a
gay
gay
romp with
romp with
Adolf and
Adolf and
Eva at
Eva in
Berkshire Garden,
Berchtesgaden.
right?
So it was sort of a joke, because I've always watched The Producers. I've watched The Producers since I was a child. And for those who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a
Yeah,
masterpiece.
1967 movie. Um, do you think, I know you worked with the guys at Harper. We've had lots of their writers. I'm friendly with the people there on the show. Do you think if you'd have pitched them a serious, and not a serious piece, but a darker piece on a trip to Auschwitz, they might have been a bit more ambivalent? Were they looking for a gay romp?
Oh no, I mean, I rang them up and I just said, I'm obsessed with these 1-star reviews of the Auschwitz Museum that I'm seeing on TripAdvisor. So, you know, can I go along? I wanted to do a piece of reportage. And actually, I feel a bit bad that we got into that sort of big history thing at the beginning, because I'm not a historian, I'm a journalist. And I go and I see things with my own eyes, and then I report on them. So they certainly weren't asking me for that, but I sort of knew, because I worship Mel Brooks so much, that I hoped that it would be funny, that there would be some irony in my trip to Auschwitz, that I would be able to find the things that were ridiculous and absurd, and write about them, because I think Auschwitz has become a sort of thing, you know, like a note. You know, you say it, it's a deep note, and then suddenly everyone pauses. But I mean, what is it really? That's what I wanted to discover. So they say yes, and I went out to Poland and I spent quite a lot of time in. Now, you're asking me about Disneyland. Krakow is Disneyland. Auschwitz isn't Disneyland, but Krakow, Jewish Krakow, is Disneyland.
Yeah, you talk about a place called Jurassic Park in Krakow, which I actually rather like Krakow, but maybe I like places like Jurassic Park.
Well, what I found amazing about it was, you go, and it's very, very beautiful, and you might recognize it from Schindler's List, which was filmed there. And there's Jewish bands, and there's a Jewish restaurant called the Ariel, and there's Jewish museums and synagogues, and everyone's wandering around. You know, it's Jewland, but
It's
there are
Jewland
almost
without Jews.
exactly, it's Jewland without Jews, except you have these funny little toys all over the place, little toys
Yeah, on
with
the shelf. That was very
Jews,
powerful. And
Jews
I'm going
with
to quote you
coins.
here because you write about it hilariously. There is a toy Jew on a shelf. He is perhaps 4 inches high, and he carries a large coin in his hand. If the coin was scaled up and with him, it would be the size of a sombrero. This is the lucky Jew, a Polish good luck charm said to bring financial benefits. Said to bring by who?
Oh, what, the people who will sell them to you? You know, that's, you know, they're like a little toy, and if you go and buy them, I mean, I didn't buy one, but I was told that if you go and buy them, you'll say, "Why am I buying this for your tourist?" And say, "Oh, it will bring you good luck. It will bring you good luck." And I mean,
I want a lucky Jew, Tanya. Where do I get them? Can you only get
I'm
them in
a lucky
Krakow?
Jew. I'm talking to you. Um, you could probably order them from the internet.
Yeah, they probably should be imported.
Well, they tried to restrict their sale because it was considered to be tasteless. But I mean, as I said in the piece, I mean, I don't mind them. I think, I mean, and I thought there was a real pathos to me for that, that Poland doesn't have any Jews anymore. And so they've got toys of Jews. And I thought, there's something so sad about that. and also
Yeah, and
quite funny.
funny and sad, although funny and sad often go together. Uh, you talked about the tastelessness of the toy Jew. Was the whole experience just tasteless? Were there any moving experiences you had there where
Well,
somehow, for one reason or other, they captured the profound evil of what happened?
I was just in shock when I went to Poland, which probably means I eventually wrote a good piece. It took me a long time to write it, though I'm maybe not the best radio guest on it. I was in a state of complete shock because I was totally unprepared for the absence I felt all over Poland. And it's not just the absence of Jews. You know, of course, you know the history. Stalin and Hitler carved it up between themselves. Then they changed sides. And after the war, the Soviets moved in. So Poland suffered an enormous trauma. And not only are the Jews missing, you know, many intellectuals are missing, dissidents are missing. It's a country of missing people, and I'd never been anywhere like that before.
What do you
Krakow, I
mean
just,
the dissidents are missing?
well, you know, they would have been murdered. You know, if they hadn't been murdered by the
Oh, you
Nazis,
mean
they would have been
dissidents
murdered.
during the Second World War?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this was a country that lived under, you know, two competing tyrannies for two generations. Um, I mean, Krakow, I just found it incredibly strange. Also, the first time I went, I flew in the night that Kabul fell. And going back to your other question about what lessons have we learned from the past, you know, how can we, do these things in any way help us to eradicate mass murder, cruelty, torture, genocide? It was, and the answer, of course, was no. And it was a bizarre feeling to go to the Poland my ancestors had fled that night. So do you want to talk about, I'd really like to talk to you about the town next to Auschwitz because it's bizarre.
Yeah, tell me about the town next to Auschwitz.
Okay, most people go straight from Krakow to the concentration and extermination camp.
Yeah,
They don't stay in the town.
I
I
think
was,
I did that.
did you? Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's completely mesmerizing. And again, it was boiling hot when we went, and it's a very beautiful little old town, and it was half Jewish. The Poles call it Oswiecim. You know, Auschwitz is the German name, so obviously, you know, they don't call it Auschwitz; they call it by its Polish name. And it was half Jewish before the war, and again, just emptiness. You walk down the old Jew street, and where there was once the great synagogue, which the Nazis blew up when they came in, made the Jews dispose of all the stone. It's just gone. It's just gone. The synagogue was rebuilt, but it has no congregation. And again, there's a sort of settled silence over the town, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful place, Galicia. And I climbed, and it's got a noble ancient history of which they're very proud. And I think it's very difficult for them, for the townspeople, that whenever their town is mentioned, all people think is extermination camp. And I climbed the tower of the medieval castle, and I mean it's a little bit morbid, but I looked towards where I knew the camp was to see if I could see it. It was all shielded by forest, just like Treblinka is shielded by forest. And I stayed there for a long time. And I don't know what I was looking for, but I didn't find anything.
Tony, some people might be watching this, especially Poles, and thinking to themselves, well, this is all very well. And of course, there was anti Semitism in Poland, and
Are you
there
think?
are. Yeah, and some Poles were responsible, and there were Poles who were mass murderers and all the rest of it. But this was ultimately a crime committed by Germans. A couple of weeks ago, we had Richard Evans on the show.
Yeah, yeah.
Very distinguished and English historian. He's just written a book about how leading Nazis were in some ways just ordinary middle-class people, for better or worse. What did your trip, I know you spent a lot of time thinking about Poles and Poland. Did the trip help you in any way to make sense of Nazis and Nazism in Germany?
I don't really care about Nazis. I sort of feel like I've thought about Nazis enough in my life. My mother was a historian of the Shoah. I think that it was a sort of attack of mediocrity. I mean, and I think a lot of the time when you're investigating what you consider to be woo evil, you think it's interesting, but it isn't. So I didn't really think about Nazis at all. I thought a lot about Poles and the
But
Polish.
why? I mean, it was the Nazis who committed these terrible crimes, not the Poles.
Well, yeah, but I was in Poland, and also, of course, the Nazis were responsible for the mass murder of Jews in Europe, but they had a lot of help, from people who weren't Nazis. And I don't think there's any point sort of pushing that under the rug, however much the Polish government, though it's got a bit better now with the new government in, wants to push it under the rug and make out that every Pole was a righteous. It just wasn't true. They used to go on Jew hunts and find a Jew and sell them for 250 grams of sugar. 250,000 Polish Jews escaped the liquidation of the ghettos. They were running around Poland for 3 years. At the end of the war, there were only 50,000 of them. What happened to them? Of course, I'm not saying that the Poles were primarily responsible for what happened. That would be insane, and a terrible libel. But it's also true that a lot, of course, about the Jedwabne pogrom in 1941, when the Poles of the town killed their Jewish neighbors without any help from the Nazis. More than 2,000 Jews were killed after 1945 by Polish citizens. There was a pogrom in Kalice in 1946 when more than 30 Jews were killed by Polish people. This is just a fact. I know
you also write about the righteous.
And what about the houses? What about all the Jewish property and all the Jewish houses?
Right, but you also you write about the rescuers, the righteous. Yeah. There's the Schindler narrative, of course, that was popularized by Spielberg. Is there truth to that?
Schindler wasn't Polish.
No, I know that Schindler wasn't Polish, but the idea of non-Jews saving Jews has become, again, another big industry in the culture and movie businesses.
My view and my next big piece is about this. I just think if you want to understand the Holocaust, if any of your listeners, for me, want to understand the Holocaust, don't listen to me. Go and watch Claude Lanzmann's Shoah. Read memoir, read testimony, read history. Do not read culture. It cannot do justice. Who was it who said that all? I think it was Primo Levi who said something like, those who returned from the Gorgon, those who saw the face of the Gorgon either did not return or returned speechless.
They did, but Levy came back. He was in Auschwitz, in Italian.
Yeah, but he wasn't in a gas chamber.
If this is a man, he eventually.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I take your point on watching the Lanzmann stuff, and it's very valuable. But you say, Levy turned it into, for better or worse, into great literature. The Polish Jewish writer Borowski wrote This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, which is a comedy about Auschwitz. So, it is possible to for better. I'm not sure I like this word, Tanya, but to turn this into art. Borowski and Levy certainly did it. Great.
No, of course, and I think, and I want to get back to the point about righteous in a minute, because I think that's very important, and I went off on a tangent. I suppose the way I feel, look, I'm not ever going to try and stop anyone from doing anything. I'm just talking about, what I want to see and what I want to know. And I just think that the Jewish people can process the Shoah any way that works for them, and the Roma and the other victims, must do the same. But I worry about the misuse of this catastrophe to make it into culture that is not art. We could go off on a tangent and talk about The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I just think if you read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas and that's all you read by John Boyne, it's about a little boy in Auschwitz. there's no Jewish aesthetic in that book. There's no Jewish sensibility in that book. And yet it is the best-selling children's book about the Shoah, apart from Anne Frank. It's taught in schools. I don't think it should be taught in schools. I don't think it gives you a full picture. And I think mostly what it does is the word Jew is there, but I don't think you would learn anything about the Jews from reading that book. I just want to say something about Polish righteousness, because I didn't want you to think that a lot of Polish people risked their lives to save their Jewish neighbors. That is absolutely undeniable. And the most famous example is the Ulmas of Markova, a family of 7, and mother was pregnant, and they were hiding a Jewish family, and they were betrayed. We think they were betrayed by a Pole. And they were all murdered. And there's going to be there's a museum. There's a museum to them in Poland. Poland Poland lost 2 million people during the war, and it has a lot to process as well. And one of the ways it processes its tragedy is, I think, the right-wing government, which has gone now, thankfully, would like to overstate the number of righteous. There's no question that some people risked their lives and were incredibly courageous and lost everything to help Jewish neighbors, but they were a small minority.
There's a great deal of debate about how to remember or forget. I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought you made a rather dismissive comment about the Zone of Interest movie. It's divided people. It got a terrible review in the New York Times, but of course won Oscars. A lot of people liked it. I thought it was a wonderful film. What do you think of the Zone of Interest, both as a film and the Amos book, on trying to make sense of this evil?
I just found it really, really trivial. I thought that the film,
the movie or the book?
No, the movie. No, I like the book, but I don't think it was really represented in the movie. The movie, I just thought that it was obsessed with its own audacity. It was like going, oh, this was done by real people. And as the Jews and the Roma over the fence were getting sent into the ovens, people were eating their dinner, and it seemed to think that this was an incredibly brave and amazing point to make. And I was just like, you think? I thought it was trivial. And as I said before, I don't like the absence. I don't like taking Jews out of Holocaust culture. I don't like the mystery and the namelessness of it. And actually, we haven't talked a lot about my visit to Auschwitz yet, but the main thing I came away from with it, I mean, look, no doubt they do their best, and whatever they do, some people will be unhappy. But I wrote this in the piece. I thought I thought 2 things. One thing I thought was love people, please love people. And the other thing I thought was, if you didn't know what a Jew was when you went to do the 5-hour tour of Auschwitz-Birkenau, you wouldn't know when you left. It seemed to me to be so much more about what was done to Jews than what Jews themselves were. So I recoil. Look, The Zone of Interest is a fine film. Whatever people want to watch, they can watch. But it didn't speak in any way to me. I just felt it was the same aesthetic, the same thing, taking this incident and making it about other people and their responses. And I have the same criticism of Schindler's List. I mean, I have a friend who's a film director, and he said, if you took the music out of Schindler's List and you ended it without the ending with the candles and the Schindler's children going to Jerusalem, and it would have been a masterpiece. But I have the same objection to Schindler's List, in which it's not really a film about Jews. It's a film about the emotional dynamic between 2 Germans. So I mean, it's probably not my market,
Are there good memorials? I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem. I'm not sure I'm sure you've been there.
Yeah.
Is that a model, or are there models for how this thing should be remembered in terms of museums and memorials?
Well, I suppose it depends whether you think people can change. And if you take, and I'm not sure about that. And so thank God I'm a writer.
Yeah, but you said before you wanted the Jews to be remembered, not just absence? Where are they remembered? Who remembers them?
Well, I'll say two things about Yad Vashem. The thing I really like about Yad Vashem is that they have collected the names of everyone they can find. I mean, in Auschwitz, my guide, the first time I went, she didn't say a Jewish name for about half an hour. And you got no sense of the people who were killed there. At Yad Vashem, they've collected all the names that they can find. And I'm very happy to say this. Yad Vashem does not avoid, in my view, the sort of trap that all Holocaust memorials fall into, which is they all have an idea that they're trying to push. You know, if you go to Washington Holocaust Museum, you know, the sense is thank God for America. You know, if you go to the new British Holocaust Museum that's going to be built, which I hope it never will be, it will be, you know, we the British, we were the only nation in Europe that didn't butcher our Jews. Oh, and by the way, don't talk about the slave trade or colonialism. And I don't know if you've been to Yad Vashem, but as you go through and at the end,
yeah, I have.
There's this vast vista of Israel. And the point is very, very clear. Here now is Israel. You know, this is what we have. This
and is that what you like or don't like? Because I know.
Well, I'm ambivalent about it. I'm just saying it's making a political point. You know, that's all I'm saying. I mean, I'm a Zionist. I'm just saying it moves on from what happened to.
But it sounds like for all the absence of Jews in Auschwitz and in Holocaust tourism, your trip taught you a lot. It triggered a lot of thinking about being Jewish as Anglo-Jewish and the experience of the Holocaust and the responsibility of the Poles. So in an odd way, for all its tackiness, it actually worked for you.
Well, the things that I learned from historians, and I learned from non-Jewish Poles who work in education and have tried very hard to process what happened to Poland, what happened to Jews of Poland, what happened to non-Jews of Poland. They're the ones who taught me what happened, you know. And if a Jewish person or a Roma person was to say to me, I'm going to go to Auschwitz, I would say, you know, be really careful who takes you round, because I didn't feel that either of the guys, like, I don't want to make a big point about this because, you know, it's not really very nice to go to Auschwitz and say, oh, do you know what? I've turned into one of my 1-star reviews on TripAdvisor people and say, oh, I didn't like it. But I mean,
did you leave a review on TripAdvisor?
No, I didn't. I left my review in Harper's. I mean, I'll give you an example. My first guide, so she didn't mention the name of any Jew for about half an hour. She seemed to be bored. She talked a lot about the toilets, and the people on the tour with us were very interested in the toilet arrangements of the Jews who were selected for work. And I just thought it was all, you know, really sort of tacky and odd. And I felt that people were there more because they were curious than because they were sad. And I found my second tour guide a lot better. But even so, we were talking about the Sonderkommando, who were the people kept temporarily alive to dispose of the bodies because, God forbid, the Germans couldn't be expected to do it. And he said, I mean, his English wasn't amazing, but he said they had a very luxurious life, which is, you know, just crap, frankly. And the other things I really didn't like was there's a lot of debate about whether you should have this hair. And one of the exhibits in the museum is this vast lump of hair from victims, and it's huge, and it's all seemed to have turned into the same color, and everyone seems to be mesmerized, and people were taking photographs of it even they weren't supposed to. And I just looked at it and I just thought, how are you honoring anyone by exhibiting their body parts? I just don't understand.
Okay, well, let's end, Tanya.
I just want to say one more thing about the
I do have one more question, but yeah, one more thing.
Okay.
And then let me ask
my main objection to the Auschwitz memorial is there is no Jewish symbolism there. None. You won't find a Star of David unless it's graffiti. There's nothing. And that was my main objection. So there's my
How
one.
should we remember, Tanya, all this? I mean, we've done lots of shows on remembering and forgetting in history. It's a theme of a number of books, writers like Lisa Genova. How would you, I mean, it's odd with the Holocaust, the further away we get, the more obsessed we seem to become with it. How would you like people to both remember and forget this terrible crime?
Well, I think this probably goes for all genocides, which is, as I said, I think we're too obsessed with the action of the genocide. And I mean, if I was going to do one thing that I would like to think would decrease anti-Semitism is, for example, in British schools, they teach the Holocaust. They do not teach the history of the Jewish people. So they remain a mystery. And if you don't know who the people who have gone are, then how can your mourning really mean anything? So I know that's a little bit, that's just one thing to say. But I do think that people need to be educated because for me, Auschwitz is a Nazi structure, you know.
So we should remember the living, not the dead.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Tanya Gold, the author of My Auschwitz Vacation, wonderfully written, deeply felt piece in this issue of Harper's on Holocaust tourism. You said you're writing something else now on all this?
Yeah, I want to do a deep dive into culture that's made about the show, beginning, of course, with my beloved Mel Brooks.
We'll have to get you back on, Tanya. I hope you'll come back on once that's written. Is it going to be
Of
for
course
Harper's
I
or for
will.
something else?
It's for somebody else.
Okay, well, somebody else unnamed, but once it's out, we'll get you back. Tanya Gold, author of My Auschwitz Vacation on Holocaust tourism. Thank you so much. Real honor to talk to you. Appreciate it.